Good morning. Welcome to our second day for the Partners for Pollution Prevention Conference and Trade Show. Small changes equal big impacts. We hope you enjoyed our speakers yesterday, and we have more speakers today with great presentations. I do want to thank BCA Consulting as an exhibitor. They did not get their name on our original PowerPoint that we presented yesterday. I do have one note from yesterday's uh, conference. When you're in the Remo exhibit hall and a table is full, you can chat, you can hit the chat button and speak to someone that may be in that table that's full. At that time, if you want, you can go to a separate table off to the side and have individual conversations. But if a table's full, you can always use the chat. If you're interested in hosting a virtual meeting for December or possibly the spring, please contact Gene Fix at IDEM or any one of the executive committee members for more details. I hope everyone has a wonderful day today, and please visit our exposition, our exhibitors in our Remo platform. It is much easier for you to use Firefox or Google Chrome as your web browser if you have any questions or if you're having any issues getting in. Again, and we've said this several times and we will through today as well, I want to give a great thanks to Julia Wickard, Jennifer Collins, Gene Fix, and Kristen Coaster for all their hard work putting this conference together and running the sessions. I also wanted to mention for your continuous education credits, please follow the directions that are in the packet that's actually located in the materials section on the partner's website. You can click on the link and it'll print off your whole packet. It'll tell you which ones or which sessions you do get credit for, but there is also at the beginning of it an email address of where the end copy needs to be or your forms need to be sent to, and then that will be taken care of from there. Again, I want to thank everyone for participating in our conference and stay safe. And I would like to introduce Julia Wickard to announce our next session. And have a wonderful day.
Well, good morning. My name is Julia Wickard, and I am the Assistant Commissioner and the Agricultural Liaison in the Office of Program Support at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. It's great to have you back with us today. To kick off today's conference, we are starting with a pre-recording of our Governor's Award ceremony that was just held last week here in our Government Center complex to actually recognize our Governor's Awards for Environmental Excellence. Each of our award winners have worked extremely hard in developing their applications, and we had an excellent behind-the-scenes committee comprised of industry leaders who evaluated the applications along with our staff. The award winners actually will be meeting with Governor Holcomb later this fall, and I want to take this time to really send a shout out to our IDEM lead staff member who coordinates the Governor's Awards from beginning to end, Cameron Machino. Thank you, Cameron, for all of your work and for working with all of our industry leaders and the applicants in putting together a great 2020 program. Commissioner Bruno Piggott will present these awards this morning. The commissioner was appointed by Indiana's Governor Eric Holcomb in 2017 as the commissioner of the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Commissioner Piggott received his master's degree from Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs and has his bachelor's degree from Michigan State University. Bruno has worked at IDEM for over 20 years in a variety of capacities, and we're very fortunate that he serves as our commissioner today. So we just ask now that you sit back, you relax, and you hear from Commissioner Piggott, who will award our 6 newest Governor's Award for environmental excellent candidates.
Good afternoon. Today's a great day. You know, this morning I spent time with EPA's regional administrator who made an announcement that he's redesignating an area in southern Indiana, Morgan County, into attainment for sulfur dioxide. And this afternoon, we get to celebrate the great efforts people are making to go above and beyond the standards that we set in our Clean Air Act and Clean Water Act. So today is truly a great day, and I'm very proud on behalf of Indiana's 51st Governor, Eric Holcomb, to announce the 2020 Governor's Awards for Environmental Excellence. The Governor's Awards are the highest environmental award in the state of Indiana. With me today to present the awards is Julia Wickard, Assistant Commissioner for IDEM's Office of Program Support. These awards recognize Indiana's leaders who've implemented the most innovative, most sustainable, and exemplary programs and projects in the Hoosier State. In order to embody our mission of environmental stewardship, we're proud to present each winner with a handmade award created by Indiana artisans from local resources. Although similar, each piece is uniquely crafted from 100% recycled glass and Hoosier-grown cherry and walnut wood from Bob Luger's Stock Farms Indiana Classified Forest. Thank you, Bob, for your contributions to this terrific award. This year's recipients have implemented practices through programs and projects that reduce pollution, they save money, and they contribute greatly to Indiana's environmental protection efforts. The organizations being recognized today have demonstrated their commitment to benefit the health and welfare of Indiana's communities and the state as a whole. In the category of environmental education and outreach, the governor has selected Indiana University's Education for Environmental Change. To address gaps in teachers' understanding of environmental science and to foster statewide networks of educators focused on building environmental literacy, the Education for Environmental Change team embarked on a project for further development, research, and implementation of professional development programming for K through 12 teachers to effectively teach environmental change science. Education for Environmental Change offers educator support via the Summer Science Institute, a 3-day workshop aligned with Indiana science standards, multiple 1-day in-semester workshops based on various topics aligned with Indiana science standards, and continuous curriculum development and in-classroom support from IU scientists and educators. Since 2017, the program has attracted more than 80 participant educators, impacting around 15,000 learners in the Hoosier State. Representing Indiana University is Adam Scribner, Director of STEM Education Initiatives for the School of Education. And we're here to present him with the award. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
In the category of energy efficiency and renewable resources, the governor has selected VUTEC, Indiana, for their energy reduction grid tied solar energy system. VUTEC in Indiana implemented a large-scale solar project in 2019. Their 1.5 megawatt direct current rooftop solar system has more than 4,440 panels distributed over their roof, along with 17 mounted inverters. VUTEC also replaced all of its 335 mercury halide high bay lights with LNTR40 LED lights. The solar-powered energy system will provide about 50% of the plant's electrical needs on an annual basis. On sunny days, it could provide up to 75% of the electrical load. Compared with their baseline year of 2015, VUTEC has saved $349,443 in energy kilowatt hours. Representing VUTEC are Environmental Health and Safety Manager Jeremy Easton and Plant Manager Banks Brewster. Come on over and pick up your award, guys. Thank you. In the category of greening the government, the governor has selected the City of Richmond's Park and Recreations Department for their Greenhouse Restoration Initiative. The Parks Department Greenhouse Restoration Initiative included removing 3 dilapidated components of the facility: a brick smokestack, several wooden greenhouses, and a boiler house. 23.93 tons of metal were recycled from the boiler house alone. In an effort to develop a more sustainable horticultural program, the greenhouse converted from buying plants to growing plants from seed, including native perennials and more environmentally friendly plant choices. The Parks Department was able to find innovative ways to reduce costs and provide environmental benefits by using compost instead of potting soil, tilling or raking playgrounds instead of spraying with glyphosate, removing invasives, and holding community plant sales. Representing the Richmond Parks Department are Laura Carnes, landscaping naturalist leader, and Izzy Wilhelm, floral and beautification leader. Laura and Izzy, congratulations, and come on over. In the category of recycle reuse, the governor selected Midwest Dairy Recycling. Midwest Dairy supplies its veal operations with calves from local dairies. While working with these dairies, Midwest Dairy learned of milk bottling companies throwing away outdated, nearly outdated, and or damaged product. After contacting these milk bottling companies, Midwest Dairy constructed a system to collect liquid and dry products at a central location in North Manchester and redistribute the products to its veal operations across Indiana. Since the launch of the program in 2017, Midwest Dairy Recycling has recycled over 2.9 million gallons of dairy milk, 2.2 million pounds of hog feed, 444,568 pounds of plastic, and over 1.4 million pounds of baby formula. Representing Midwest Dairy are President Steve Anderson and his wife, Pamela Anderson. Steve and Pamela, come on over. In the category of land use and conservation, the governor has selected Elkhart County Soil and Water Conservation District for its Stormwater Alliance Management Plan, commonly referred to as SWAMP. The SWAMP program is a cost-share program that assists 75% of the total cost of each approved project. SWAMP covers 6 best management practices that benefit not only the land users, but Elkhart County as well through increased water quality. The 6 BMPs included in the program are blind inlets, cover crops, filter strips, grade stabilization structures, grassed waterways, and exclusion fencing. Since the beginning of the project in 2017, the number of participants in the SWAMP program has increased from 7 in 2017 to 68 in 2019. Since the program's inception, Swamp has prevented a total of 20,373 tons of soil from entering local waterways, saved $42,783 in total on-farm nutrient benefit, and saved a total of $100,438 in total off-farm water quality benefit. The Elkhart Soil Water Conservation District representatives could not be with us today, but we congratulate them on their award. In the category of the 5-year continuous improvement, the governor has selected Cummins Incorporated Columbus Engine Plant for their environmental management system projects. Cummins Engine Plant, located in Columbus, Indiana, has implemented 5 environmentally beneficial projects as part of their environmental management system. Their EMS projects include an LED lighting upgrade in 2017, manufacturing controls project from 2017 through 2019, test cell process improvement projects from 2016 through 2019, zero waste to landfill initiative from 2017 through 2018, and Community Recycles Day held annually since 2010. Some of the highlights of the Cummins CMS projects include test cell process improvements, which resulted in water usage reductions of 3.4 million gallons per year. An LED lighting upgrade, which resulted in a reduction of electricity usage of 82,247 kilowatt hours per month. As part of their zero waste to landfill initiative, Cummins diverted 136,820 pounds of waste per year from the landfill. Their Community Recycling Day, which is open to all Columbus citizens, has diverted another 740,000 pounds of material from the landfill from 2015 through 2019. The Cummins representatives could not be with us today, but we congratulate them on their award. The 2020 Governor's Awards winners will be recognized by Governor Holcomb and IDEM through a press release issued to statewide media outlets. Please join me once again in congratulating the 2020 Governor's Awards for Environmental Excellence winners. Thank you all.
Again, congratulations to our 6 award winners. We do have 6 special videos that have been assembled by each of our award winners, and those will be available for your viewing pleasure following the conference. We just ask that you can find them on the partners website. Most likely they will also be posted on the Hay Summit page, and you'll be directed to them. So we're excited that you'll have a little bit additional opportunity to dig a little deeper and learn more about these 6 great award winners, and we're excited about that. I also want to take the opportunity to really send a shout out to our partners for Pollution Committee, Executive Committee. They have been great in assisting the state of Indiana during this time and have graciously purchased these 6 awards this year. And we know it certainly takes a village to work together, and the relationship we have with the partners organization is second to none. So thank you to the P2 Executive Committee and everything that you do and the awards that you have put together for this important award, this Indiana award. We really appreciate it. So we're going to move on. We're running a little bit ahead, but we think we'll be fine in terms of having our next session begin right at 10:30. So I know you're all still with us, so we really didn't take a break, but we're excited that you're with us to hear our next 2 speakers. And the balance of the day's agenda is extremely robust. As we think about a virtual conference, for those that were with us yesterday, you heard me talk about virtual being all. And really, that's the beauty of being able to conduct a virtual conference, is that many people from various walks of life and various locations across the state and the country for that matter can join our conference and learn about pollution prevention efforts. We are all looking forward to the day when we can meet face to face, but in the meantime, we're all getting pretty good at virtual meetings and understanding how they all work and work together. Certainly this over-the-screen opportunity is giving us opportunities to learn more about the different technologies that exist. But what we're really excited about is the type and caliber of speakers that we've been able to bring together, the various information and the networking conversations that we've been able to develop for you. And we know that you're actually taking part in this conference, maybe in your home office, or maybe you're in your actual office in your place of business, or you may be sitting in your living room. And so wherever you are, we hope that the information you glean both yesterday and today are things that you can incorporate into your place of business or into your personal lives. We do want to remind everyone that we do have 3 hashtags that we are using when promoting our conference. And so if you are users of social media, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, we would just ask that you use the hashtags, hashtag small changes, hashtag big impact, and hashtag pollution prevention. And those are on the screen in front of you. It just helps us keep track of the kind of activity we have on the social media channels. So as we move into our second day of the conference, we have a great presentation on PFAS. And we know this is an issue that at many times kind of eludes people. There's a lot of speculation on PFAS and the different characteristics and the challenges. And so we're going to hear directly from industry experts. And we're going to hear first from Purdue University's Linda Lee. And as many of you know, and you're joining us because this session is providing drinking water and wastewater CEUs to those that need them. Just another quick reminder, and Ben mentioned it earlier, we just ask that you go to that conference packet and apply for that CEU certificate as the conference instructions indicated earlier as we prepared for the conference and sent that information out. But before we kind of dive into this session, I want to make sure everyone's aware of our logistics for the day. I'll certainly introduce the speaker in just a few moments. You will have an opportunity to hear their pre-recorded presentation, but then each of our speakers are going to be live with us to answer questions. And so we just ask that you use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. As I said, this is a pre-recorded session with a live moderator, and obviously that's the role I'm playing today. We are recording the entire conference, and it will be available as a replay in Hay Summit, and we also will be posting the videos on our IDEM YouTube channel following the conference. We do have conference staff that are behind the scenes monitoring and providing links and resources if you should need them. And as I indicated, we will have our speakers live to answer questions. So as a question comes to mind during the presentations today, go ahead and type it into the Q&A box, and we will have a moderated discussion of our questions as well. We do have some amazing sponsors that have graciously stepped up and risen to the challenge to assist us in putting together this virtual conference. Their logos are in front of you. Our gold sponsors are Caterpillar, Lilly, NEI, Elysian, Roche, and Evonik. And our silver sponsors are Allison Transmission and AstraZeneca. I do want to take this opportunity to just one more time in this session send a huge shout out to some of our talented staff that are behind the scenes. I've been calling them the three wizards behind the curtain. I have the opportunity to lead and work with these three amazing women who have each learned 3 virtual platforms. And even after the conference yesterday, we were on another call after the conference talking about the day, how it went, what we could do to improve today's message for you. And they were still learning different tips and tricks that they're right now behind the scenes working on. They learned the platforms Zoom, Remo, and Hey Summit in record time. They've been the ones that have answered your questions when you've emailed or called them in, and they are truly passionate about the conference topics that we're talking about and have given of themselves a lot of hours, both morning and evening, to make sure that this first ever virtual conference goes on without a hitch. And I think so far, so good. So I want to take this time to thank our P2 executive committee members and IDEM staff members, Jennifer Collins and Jean Fix, for their incredible abilities to multitask. And also I want to send a special shout out to our newest IDEM staff member who actually I hired in the middle of the pandemic at the beginning in March. When we were all sequestered at home, she came on board and quickly assumed a lot of roles, but one in particular was being our virtual conference platform queen, and that's Kristen Coasters, and Ben has spoken of her as well. So I want to say thank you to Jennifer, Jean, and Kristen for all of your work. Myself, and I know our conference attendees really appreciate you. I also want to say thank you to our P2 Executive Committee for brainstorming and thinking boldly and big about how we could continue with the 23rd annual conference and not let it go idle. For this conference especially, I want to say thank you to Ben McKnight, to Mike Foster, to Ron Rothenberger, to Meg Welton, and to Steve Jacobson. We really appreciate each of your work and our IDEM staff for stepping up and making it happen. So as we begin this next session, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Linda Lee, whose topic is, it's in front of you, PFAS characteristics and challenges in waste management and clean potable waters. Dr. Lee is a Purdue University professor in the Department of Agronomy in the College of Agriculture at Purdue University. She serves as the program head for the Ecological Sciences and Engineering Interdisciplinary Graduate Program. Her group researches environmental fate processes and contaminant remediation in various media for use in mitigation for industrial and agricultural settings. She is well published in the top tier of environmental journals and has served on national and international advisory groups addressing water quality, land-applied biosolid policies, and predicting chemical risk. Dr. Lee, we're really glad you're with us today, and we will show your presentation and then have a question and answer time following the presentation.
Today I'm going to share on PFAS characteristics, some challenges in waste management, and clean potable waters. So briefly, I'm going to just touch on a few characteristics, a little bit on the guidance level, what might be in our waste-based soil amendments, how that might lead to PFAS showing up in our water, and a little bit on treatment status and some concluding comments. And PFAS come from so many sources, and we need to remember that. So from landfill leachate, from industry and manufacturing, from the use of aqueous film-forming foams to fight hydrocarbon fires at both airports and military sites, from our consumer products and industry and landfill inputs into our wastewater treatment plant, then ends up, resulting in PFAS in the effluent or in land-applied biosolids that come from our treatment plants, but they can also be present in composted materials that contain PFAS. What are PFAS? I feel like most of us know now, so I'm not going to spend too long on what they are, but I just want to highlight that Every time you turn around, there's a larger number of PFAS that we now know have been produced and could be present in our consumer products, could be used in industry, thus could be present in the environment. And, the key things to realize about it, it's this very large family. And within that, we can group them into different subclasses depending on their unique differentiating characteristics. And then within that subclass, we can have numerous ones. So here we have our overall family. We've now gone to the ones that are acid in behavior, and now a subclass of carboxylic acids. And now we have a series of different chain lengths within that group of acids. And so even for one subclass, you have numerous individual PFAS compounds. And then for an individual PFAS, like PFAS, that's a good example, you have multiple isomers. You can have that with other ones, but that's one example where you have not just linear, but several different PFAS molecules with different branching. And when we think of PFAS, we think of one molecule when in essence it's several. And lastly, and probably most important, is that these subclasses either don't degrade at all or they degrade to other subclasses, and thus the term forever chemicals when we talk about PFAS. So I want to just highlight when we talk about PFAS biodegradation, it can biodegrade, but this is not unto mineralization. It's just transformation to other PFAS. I have two examples here of two different precursors that we call them precursors because they eventually lead to alkyl acids. And these precursors will degrade. And as I said, they degrade to multiple different intermediates. For example, the one on the right, two of those intermediates are stable enough to be on the EPA watch list, the 24 PFAS that they are developing protocols for. But there's multiple steps in the transformation pathway, and oftentimes many more than just a single pathway, depending on the microbial populations and the conditions. And they lead to a variety of acids. I'm just showing you here the dominant acid that might result from each of these precursors. And on the left, it's resulting in a carboxylic acid subgroup. The right, that precursor is resulting in sulfonic acid, like PFAS subgroup. All these acids are persistent, and because they exist at a negative charge or predominantly negative charge, they're more soluble and more mobile than the PFAS, thus what we tend to measure in our water supplies. And when we're looking at the compound class that's represented by the molecule on the right, they are made by a telomerization process. And so that's this 2-carbon linkage in between the perfluorinated tail and some head group. And that head group can be as simple as a carboxylic acid or as complicated as the sulfonamide that you see. What's most important about this is that that telomere linkage is subject to degradation. So in this case, we have an acrylate that will degrade at the other link and then create this fluorotelomere alcohol that then degrades very quickly into a suite of carboxylic acids. On the right, you have another telomere compound. It also breaks down, but its first breakdown step intermediate is a fluorotelomere sulfonate. What's significant about that is this sulfonate degrades much slower than this first intermediate from the one on the left. And it eventually does go to the alcohol and then degrades to a suite of carboxylic acids, but the pathway is slower. So it's important to realize that different precursors will degrade to different intermediates, and subsequent degradation to the carboxylic acids will be at different rates. And so that's important to remember when we're thinking about precursors. And in some cases, we've seen yields to the primary acid of up to 40% in the case of going from telomere alcohol to PFOA. So just in summary, all these different precursors can be present in our wastes. And then when they are composted, whether it's in the wastewater treatment process, whether it happens to be degradation through remedial activities at a site targeted at other compounds, whether it's composting, they degrade through multiple steps into a suite of carboxylic and sulfonic acids. And those acids can be range in chain length, again, our sulfonic acids, again, our carboxylic acids. In this case, if we have 8 carbons, we think about the octane chain. But what's important is that in the sulfonic acids, all the carbons are perfluorinated. In the carboxylic acid, one of the carbons is not. And this leads to the fact that long chain carboxylic acids of concern and that are being phased out is C7 and greater. For the sulfonic acids, it's 6 and greater. But if you want to keep it simple, you just count the number of carbons that are perfluorinated. And 6 carbons or more, we're trying to work towards phasing those out, or they have been phased out. So the hard truth is that when we're talking about our wastewater treatment plants, which are a conduit for PFASs, you have multiple sources coming in, and those PFASs are going to either end up in the sludge, which gets converted to biosolids, or they're going to get discharged in the effluent. That's just the way it is. And what originally comes in might not be the exact PFASs that come out, but they're all still going to be in the PFAS family and not and be things that we're going to be monitoring. So the way that states are trying to think about how to monitor effluent and biosolids are really led by drinking water guidance, which is all over the board. We know EPA is 70 parts per trillion, some of PFOA and PFAS, but other states have been much more aggressive and much more specific. I'm showing you examples from Michigan, Maine, and Vermont, and California here that range all the way from reporting limits of 5 to 6 parts per trillion for PFOA and PFAS to 8 and 16 parts per trillion that Michigan has there. So the point is that there's a lot of variation. You see differences in the amounts, for example, PFAS to PFHXS, the difference is 6 carbon chain length versus 8 carbon. And we know that although the 6 carbon might invoke similar health effects to humans, or we've linked them to similar health effects, it requires a higher concentration. That gets translated into a higher level in the drinking water. They also don't bioaccumulate as much at the shorter chain length. Then we can compare it to Canada, which has much higher levels than our current EPA guidance of 70 parts per trillion for the sum of PFOA and PFAS. So leaching from biosolids, the direct leaching into the pore water might exceed these guidance levels. And if that's what you're looking at, then you have lots of issues with our biosolids and compost. Septic systems may also leach concentrations above this. Now, mind you, what leaches from our biosolids in a septic system is not drinking water, and it will be diluted, but just to keep that, that mind. What are we seeing for surface water and biosolids? Michigan has a 12 part per trillion for PFAS. Some plants might be able to meet this, but a lot of typical effluents still cannot meet this level that's being discharged into water. And this is specific for water that might contain fish for fish consumption. Alaska has got some, close to 2 and 3 parts per billion for PFOA and PFAS in their soil cleanup levels. New York has the sum of the 2 at 70 parts per billion, which could be met by a lot of biosolids that I've looked at. Whereas Maine's levels, they have them specified for 3 PFAS. The ones they have specified for PFOA and PFAS will not typically be met by any of the biosolids or composts that I've looked at. And then Vermont has actually gone as far as to call any liquids with over 20 parts per trillion a hazardous waste. So it's all over the board. So let me just show you some data for a few slides on what I've seen in biosolids and compost. Obviously, I'm actually a proponent of being allowed to land apply compost and biosolids, but I want to know what's in there, and I want to know how can we, improve the value of these materials by reducing the unwanted constituents that might be present. And in this case, it's the PFASs. So we'll discuss this. So we looked at several different commercially available materials, which most of these were biosolid-based products. These are available in places like Walmart and Lowe's, as well as several composts that are also municipal waste, but not from your wastewater treatment plants. These are city waste that tree clippings, grass clippings, compostable food packaging, compostable food serviceware, anything that is organic and can be composted that is being brought together to make a nice soil amendment and minimize how much goes into our landfills. Our general analytical approach is to freeze dry our solids, we extract them, we add mass labeled surrogates. In the current work that I'm going to show you for the just the suite of compost and biosolid based amendments I just showed you are going to be targeted on just the alkyl acids that I've talked a lot about. But there's also ways to look at what precursors might be there that could lead to these acids in the future. One's a chemical oxidation assay, and one is just using high resolution mass spectrometry to screen for PFASs. And then we have an assay where we just look to see what type of PFAS might release to the pore water that's present in these materials once they're land applied. So here we'll look at our occurrence of perfluoroalkyl acids in several of the products that I listed. And the first thing you can see is generally that the commercially available biosolid-based products tend to have higher PFAA loads than our other products, up to 185 micrograms per kilogram, or parts per billion shown here for this product here. But also as low as 10 parts per billion, which is actually much lower than what we see in a lot of our compostable food packaging, food waste, and tree and grass clippings. What you see as a key thing, you see lots of oranges and reds in the bars for the biosolid-based fertilizers. These represent the longer chain. Now remember, these were 2014 materials, and while PFAS had been phased out of a lot of use, PFOA wasn't completely really phased out in its use till 2015. And then compared to the blues and purples that you see in the compostable municipal wastes from the cities, being the shorter chains. And in the municipal waste compost, you see that compared to just backyard compost, leaves and grass only, versus a lot of compostable food serviceware, you see much higher levels in the compost that contain packaging and food serviceware and food waste. For number 9 that we see here, it actually also included some paper materials, unbleached coffee filters, and some food waste. And so it's a little higher than our background. And then you might ask, why are we even seeing it in our leaves and our grass? Well, we have background levels due to atmospheric deposition. We have PFASs that are in insecticides, either as a primary ingredient for targeting the insect or as a carrier. And you could also have your water supply could be contaminated and you don't know it. And you're irrigating your lawn with that water supply. So lots of reasons to have background contamination. So what about all the other PFASs we don't monitor for? And I said that we could use a chemical assay. For example, the TOP assay. It's used at, it's heat activated persulfate at a high pH. And what we see here is our total concentration of carboxylic acids in our original material prior to this assay. That would be the dark bars. And then after the TOP assay, where you see the grayish and the white bars. The gray bars was the TOP assay done prior to cleaning up all the other dissolved organic matter that can get extracted from our solids, which will then compete for all the radicals that are produced in this chemical assay, thus will not show you all the PFASs that might be present. And then you see the white bars for post cleanup. And in all these cases, you see these white bars are much higher than the solid black bars, which tells us we have a lot of PFASs that we have not monitored or quantified or identified in these materials. And again, if you have a lot of dissolved organic matter, it's going to reduce the efficacy of the assay, so it's important to clean up your material first. And the take-home message is that we're oftentimes only monitoring the alkyl acids and a few other compounds, and these can all lead to all the unidentified or the hidden sources can subsequently lead to generation of perfluoroalkyl acids once these things are land applied. We happen to not shown distinctly here, but the biggest one we saw was our 6-carbon carboxylic acid that showed up. But it's important to realize when you look at TOP assay data or when you hear people talk about it, it's not one-to-one. And so we talked about the chemical assay that could be used to reveal some of this hidden sources of PFAS, and I just want to mention, so we hope that in this oxidation procedure, precursors degrade to PFCAs. Conversion can vary, okay? But what I want to highlight here is, for example, the PFASs that are produced from the electrochemical process, those will degrade 1-to-1 for the perfluoroalkyl chain length to a carboxylic acid. So all 3 of these on the left, have 8 carbon perfluorinated chain lengths, and they all degrade to primarily just PFOA in this assay. However, the ones on the bottom, these 4, are all fluorotelomere-based compounds. And as you see, when they degrade in this oxidation process, they go to several different, usually a few primary and then some other residuals. So example, the 6,2-fluorotelomere sulfonate goes to 4 carbon, 5 carbon, and 6 carbon acid, all about even distribution. And that is a very consistent pattern. So we can use this assay when you to try to assess things, but it's not one-to-one. And when you have a whole mixture, you really don't know what's going on. You only know that if you see a huge rise in carboxylic acids, that you have a large source of precursors that could lead to acids once they're land applied. It's also important to realize that these electrochemical precursors under microbial degradation would lead to sulfonic acid. So in this case, PFAS. But this oxidation assay turns everything into carboxylic acids, okay? So that's just an important thing to remember. Still a lot to investigate with this assay, but it's definitely useful to labs that might not have high resolution mass spectrometry to look for all the different PFASs that might be present. In our lab, we're fortunate to have that assay, and so we can use that to screen for our precursors and then turn around and get standards to either confirm that they're there or quantify them. And for all the biosolid-based and municipal compost that we've looked at, these are the primary precursors that we've seen, and the 6,2,8,2 as well as 4,2-fluorotelomere sulfonate are commonly monitored now, as is a couple of these other sulfonamide-containing PFASs that are intermediates on the way to PFAS. So what does it look like to have these loads? How might that release PFASs to the water? Basically, how tightly bound are they to these soil amendments that we might land apply? So we have a little assay that we like to use where we pack some solids into a syringe and saturate them for a given amount of time, then centrifuge out the liquid phase and then extract that for PFASs. And what I'm going to just show you as an example for the biosolid-based components, you can see that as we increase our load at the parts per billion level in the soil amendments, we see releases in the parts per trillion level of the PFASs into pore water. And yes, they're well above the 70 parts per trillion that even EPA proposes as a guidance regulation. But remember, this is what's getting immediately released to the pores of this solid. These biosolids, these composts, are usually mixed at 1 to 3% with the upper horizon of soil. And so then you're going to interact with soil and you're going to have subsequent dilution on the way to groundwater or surface water. So they will be diluted and attenuated. But it gives us an idea of what can be released. And it turns out that it can be predicted quite well with just knowing how much carbon is present in our soil amendments. So we can normalize the distribution between the amendment and water to the amount of carbon in the amendment and get this pretty nice linear correlation, log linear, with the number of perfluorinated chains that are present. And so this is all the data from the, like 13 biosolids we looked at and 10 of the municipal solid waste materials. And so this is encouraging to know that you can actually do a pretty good job to predict what might get released to pore water. And again, this is not what's going to end up in groundwater, but what will be released. And this works very well for composted materials because they're high in carbon. It's not the same for soils. We're still having a lot of trouble adequately predicting how compounds partition in and out of soils from water. We also wanted to look at temporal variation. So we see here from Milorganite, the company out of Wisconsin that produces this, worked with us to look at how trends were changing over time. And you can see here that the total carboxylic acids in the blue bar became reduced over time significantly. We can also see that most of this reduction came from the long chain, which is represented by the red bar, but we also saw some statistical change in the short chains as well, especially the C6 carboxylic acid. Keep in mind that for these materials, we only looked at the alkyl acids, not all the hidden precursors for them. So just keep that in mind. So we wanted to look at, well, how might temporal variation look like for other materials? Because every material that comes from different plants, processed a different way, sources coming into the plant can vary. And again, if you had a firefighting activity, then you might have had a huge PFAS load to your plant. Maybe that occurred in 2014 and you haven't had a lot of that 2016, 2018. So we really just weren't sure what we call product H in our ES&T publication, and we compared it to a product from that same vendor that we got in 2019. And much to our surprise, we saw a huge increase in the total perfluoroalkyl acids, going from 35 to over 200 of the total acids. And we also quantified some of the other PFASs that I don't report here. Well, some of them are reported here. The ones in boxes we detected, but we didn't have standards at the time. But you can see some of the other ones that are reported here. Not what's important. What's important is the huge increase. So the temporal variation that we saw from milorganite doesn't apply across the board necessarily. The other really important thing that we haven't evaluated is how our changes in our extraction procedure might have altered the total PFAS that we see. And we learned now that we've looked at so many different materials from different plants that the plants that use polymer-based coagulants, we actually had to change our extraction procedure to be able to adequately recover the acids from that material. And so we don't know if this vendor is one that uses the polymers, and we're trying to find that out. And we are also going to go back and use our new method on this older product that we have here with the new method. And then we can compare this to some data that I have from a land reclamation study where they use biosolids to reclaim this very poor looking landscape that now looks quite beautiful from the use of biosolids, but it wasn't focused on PFAS at all. So we wanted to look at PFAS. So I got some of these samples, and this is the PFAS load in these biosolids being applied are approaching 400 micrograms per kilogram of just the ones we can quantify, which is, in this case, we're looking at about 40 plus PFAS now. And now how does that translate to what might be in the water? Well, this study had lysimeter samples frozen in the frozen lysimeter samples that I was able to analyze for PFAS. And so in this case, this is the treatment that was 5 times the normal level that you would apply, because we wanted to see, well, if we see it here, then we'll know it's worth looking at some of the other sites all the way to control sites. So this is just a snapshot. But what you can see is we are seeing high levels of parts per trillion showing up at the 15 centimeter depth of the water that's leaching through. This was after a 2.5 centimeter rain event. But then you see that over time, we see a decrease in what's coming out. And in the first flush, you see mostly of the shorter chains. And again, it continues to be mostly shorter chains, although there are some of the 7 and 8 carbon carboxylic acid showing up. We didn't see any PFAS showing up in this particular material, even though it was present in the original biosolid. So, and then remember, what's showing up in this lysimeter is going to get diluted further if it goes into a stream, or diluted further if it on its way to reach groundwater. This is similar to a tile drain field study that was done in Ottawa, Canada, where they applied biosolids from a plant that received a mixture of waste, industrial, domestic, and commercial, and they dewatered, and it was all anaerobically digested sludge. Once it was land applied, and the amount of PFAS in what was being land applied for the PFAS that were monitored, and a couple other compounds, was up about 70 parts per billion. And in the water, in the groundwater, you were seeing 3 or less parts per trillion, and it was a hit or miss. In the tile water coming out, you were seeing typically low levels, with the highest hit that was just a couple times for PFOA in the, here I'm showing the highest one, 23 parts per trillion. And there were no acids actually detected in the wheat grain for the study that they used. So just showing you that while you have pretty high loads in your biosolids, what's probably getting into tile drains or river waters or groundwater in most cases is So briefly, I want to comment on what we have seen in terms of changes in PFAS levels for different treatment processes that are used for biosolids prior to their land application or use in gardens. And we didn't do these treatment processes ourselves. We worked with plants that use these, and we looked at the PFAS loads that were in the material prior to these treatment processes and after the treatment process. And what we found is that of the ones we looked at, composting, heat treatment, blending with other types of materials, and thermal hydrolysis, only blending led to a decrease in the PFAS loads in the material, and that was primarily due to dilution. They were being blended with materials that were low or negligible in PFAS loads. Thermal hydrolysis was done at both an unadjusted pH and a high pH, and it didn't seem to help the situation. But I will say that I do want to comment that while high pH thermal hydrolysis did nothing to alleviate perfluoroalkyl acid loads in biosolids, it actually has shown some promise for aqueous solutions, PFAS defluorination, or actually mineralization within a reasonable amount of time and not, drastically high temperatures, was able to break down PFAS up to 80% of it. So there is hope for that process, just not with regards to biosolids. Perspective, when we're thinking about the contribution of biosolids to perfluoroalkyl acids and other PFAS in our environment. So normally when we apply biosolids, it's based on a nitrogen requirement. And so what I'm showing you here is in the open bars, that's the amount of acids, perfluoroalkyl acids, present in the biosolids in parts per billion. And what I'm showing you in the red bar is if you applied that same biosolid based on its nitrogen requirement, what would be the alkyl acid load to the soil? And so what you can see here in some cases, for example, if we look at product J, we see that if we apply it based on our nitrogen requirement, we only get this very small bar in terms of the amount of PFAS we've applied to the soil. Where if we apply product M, for example, based on its nitrogen requirement, we have to apply way more product, which leads to way higher levels of perfluoroalkyl acids being added to the soil. So we have to keep that in mind. If a biosolid has high nitrogen levels, then very little has to be applied, which means the PFAS loads that are getting land applied will also be relatively smaller. And so how much PFAS is added is all going to really be based on nitrogen if you follow the guidelines, and this is all just my perspective is based on a single application. One thing we have to keep in mind is that if people buy these from Lowe's or Walmart, the commercially available ones, or if they get this material free from a local municipal plant, which is often the case, they could not apply these based on nitrogen requirements because they're given a suggestion, but they can apply them as much as they want. And the truth is, plants grow so well in this these organic amendments that it's not uncommon at all for users to use way more than what was suggested to them or indicated to them based on nitrogen requirements. And so that's actually led some municipalities to stop providing this free to the public. And probably, then our biggest concern with uptake into plants, and I don't have time to show that, is with home gardens. But even then, it's relatively small from my perspective. So given that PFAS are forever chemicals, it would seem like we should just ban them, right? From land application, ban them from ever being discharged into our streams. But the truth is, this really places a very heavy burden on our public municipalities. So we need to think twice about our recommendations in this area. It could lead to a lot of unintended consequences, which could be a talk all on its own. But just from a very minimum, if you then can't land apply these and everything goes to landfills or incinerators, it could increase the cost of our municipalities to deal with this up to maybe close to an order of magnitude. That translates to tax dollars, who's going to be impacted the most by this, and it's going to be our lower income families. And so it also, that's just one of many unintended consequences. So what we really need to do is focus on controlling sources. Let's look at what kind of sources are coming into the plants that are ending up in our biosolids or in our effluent that's being discharged into streams. Some facilities are now doing this. Michigan has set a good example at a couple of their regions where they've already identified certain sources coming in from industry that are contributing a lot to their PFAS loads and biosolids, and now those industry are having to pre-treat their influent coming in. Great example of how we can get to a point source to reduce these loads. We can focus on regulating non-essential uses. Obviously, this isn't at the purview of a municipal plant where controlling sources is, but if we all can push towards wanting to see PFAS phased out of use, PFAS as the family out of non-essential uses, this will really help. States like California have already moved on this with regards to carpets and even textiles, leathers and clothing material. You have states like the state of Washington that now has a bill in place to get them out of food packaging, assuming there is a replacement by January 2021. This is going to go a long way to reducing PFAS entering the environment and going into our municipalities. And so I say, let's be like a rabbit and be very fast at regulating non-essential uses, be fast at controlling point sources that we can control. Let's be very slow at trying to come up with regulations that could be too conservative and cause a lot of unintended consequences. And in the end, if we take this dual approach, we will be winners. Just as we've seen phased out PFAS, the ones that are primarily phased out, now huge decreases in what's present in human blood samples. So these are all signs of encouragement. And I've already highlighted some of these recommendations, and they're just here again. I think, and even in the biosolid treatment process, they have to assess potential points of contamination. If they have, they're not undercover and they're around a lot of industry, they could be getting wet dry deposition from industry onto their biosolids as they're being composted. And I think it's important for us to come up with mitigation and treatment options that are sustainable and economical. It's really good to say, well, let's put everything in a landfill. Let's burn everything. We don't even know what's happening in our incinerators. We don't know if we're spewing out yet another whole suite of subclasses of PFAS that are totally uncharacterized because they're produced in the incineration process. So we just need to be very methodical about how we approach this compound class. I say they've been with us for 30, 40 plus years, and let's just work towards getting rid of them. So we want to continue to monitor. We want to continue to phase out. We want to continue to support research to better understand sources, their behavior once they enter the environment. So all these things can lead to better mitigation and treatment options. And here's kind of a synopsis of treatment options, but the truth is when it comes to drinking water, potable waters, which is all I'll really focus on today briefly, is we're really looking at granulated activated carbon, and we already know that some of these PFAS break through pretty early on with the GAC, so we're not really content with just using GAC. There's some ion exchange resins that have been developed that are being evaluated that might be starting to be used at some of the municipal plants. Reverse, and just remember, this is all removal and not destruction. So you still have a waste. You still have this solid phase, the GAC or the ion exchange resin that has to be dealt with. So it's not destruction. Likewise, so there's no silver bullet. Even when we think we can get it out of our drinking water, we still have a waste that we have to deal with. So it's always really about treatment trains. I want to say we also have reverse osmosis and nanofiltration. Both of those do a very good job of getting rid of PFAS. The problem is they also have a lot of waste, with RO having a lot more waste than nanofiltration. It's a liquid waste that has to be dealt with. So no matter how we look at this, we can provide clean drinking water at varying costs, but we still have a waste to deal with. And that waste that we have to deal with elevates the cost of providing that drinking water. So, we just have a lot of challenges that we just have to methodically work towards solving. And that means lots of people at the table talking about it. And as I just want to end in terms of PFAS impacts to potable water supplies, most of the impacts to water supplies are from military sites, airports, industrial direct discharges into air or water, or into, which are mostly the PFAS producing facilities, but also you have the industrial wastes that come from users. And a lot of times that's how they've land disposed of their waste, like in the case of Wolverine. Biosolids to this point, unless it's been highly impacted by a PFAS contaminated discharge, has not been shown to contribute significantly to PFAS levels in the human population or have exposure of really serious exposures of concern. There's just so many exposures to PFAS to a human in the environment that probably biosolids, the typical one, is not contributing significantly to that. And we are testing drinking water supplies if you get your water from a public or private entity. But what about if you have rural water? So a lot of research highlight here. We have a lot of research that's being funded by lots of different agencies, most recent ones that are focused on rural water supplies. Purdue got one, interestingly enough, Indiana University got one, and the third one went to the University of Georgia. And all of us will be looking at PFAS occurrence and fate in rural water supplies, ways to kind of predict when there might be a concern through various modeling components and different strategies to help our middle to smaller municipal plants deal with the PFAS issue. So you can go to this website and learn more about these projects that were just launched last week. There's lots of other resources. You can go to the ITRC website. NEBRA, which is the Northeast Biosolids Residual Association, they really have, Ned Beecher stays up on a lot of the PFAS things that are going on with waste and posts things up there. Michigan has been very aggressive to both in analysis and current studies on PFAS, and so there's a lot of insightful things we can learn from their website as well. And as always, this data came from various people in my group, funded by various different sources of funds and facilitated by different people. And so I just want to thank them. So these are just my acknowledgements.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lee, for that very informative and technical presentation. It looks like it spurred a lot of questions, as there are several in our Q&A chat area. Dr. Lee is available and is going to come on screen to help answer those questions live. But with us to do that, to moderate the questions, is Jennifer Collins. Jennifer is the manager of the Pollution Prevention and Compliance Assistance section here in our Office of Program Support. And she also is our P2 Executive Committee member representing IDEM. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Julia, and good morning, everyone. Welcome, Dr. Lee. It's fantastic to have you here with us, and thank you for your presentation. It's very informative. We do have several questions that came in during your talk, and I will go ahead and relay those to you.
I can see them.
Okay. So we'll start with the first question that came in was, does incineration or gasification destroy PFAS into simple compounds?
Yeah, so I think I briefly commented on that. The answer is we don't really have enough information yet to say that across the board. So it's going to depend on, in case of incineration, what is the temperature and how long does the waste stay at that temperature that will control things. So that's an area of research that is starting to develop. I'm not doing that research myself in my lab, but hopefully we'll get information in the near future. Same with gasification. I'm not sure what information is really out there on that. So there's definitely things that we need to know.
Yes, okay, great.
And so that's one of my things. Let's not just send everything to an incinerator. Incinerators weren't designed to break down PFAS. So, we have to understand it first.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. From Angela Taylor, has your group retained original products or samples from the 2014 study to test with the new analytical methods to verify results?
Yes, I think I commented on that, but I guess I was talking pretty fast, and Julia had me worried that technical, I didn't want to be too technical, but there's just so much to say in such a short period of time. But yes, we freeze dry our biosolids, and that really, actually all of our solids materials, so we can go back and analyze them much later and not have lost the integrity. And so we are doing that right now as part of a biosolids paper, methods paper that we would like to get out this year.
Great, thank you. And we also have another question. I'm not sure who the participant is. Nasiri is the last name. Are source reductions the best way to remove PFAS? And I think part of the question is, will it eliminate the intermediate and isobat?
Yeah, so I think source reduction is a really key way to remove things, and in doing that, you are also going to remove intermediates and isomers, assuming that when they're doing their source reduction, they're looking at that. So that's actually a good question, because when someone's doing treatment before it comes into the plant, you know, what are the guidelines for the fact that that's been treated? So I would say if they're using a typical treatment process where they're using adsorption, then they're probably going to get most of the precursors, because they tend to absorb much more than the intermediates or the end products. But that's actually a really good question. What are the criteria to say you've sufficiently cleaned up your waste before you brought it into the treatment plant?
Is that an area that's being looked at, or do you know?
I would say probably not. But like I said, if it's primarily adsorption technologies they're using, then they are capturing most of that PFAS, because they tend to stay in the upper zone, and then would slowly release these other products over time, depending on their degradation rates.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Angela Taylor. Does the land type or soil mix that the biosolids are applied to have a significant impact on the ability for the fate and transport of the PFAS or PFOA?
Yeah, sure. So soil's going to do what it always does. It's going to attenuate through either sorption processes or degradation processes. And sorption processes will be impacted by the soil properties, and that's going to vary. And then degradation processes are going to be impacted by the microbial communities and the nutrients. You know, the anything that's good and healthy for microbes will then stimulate microbial activity. And these compounds, it doesn't need to be a special microbe. You know, they all play a different role in the path, and it's pretty ubiquitous. And then obviously climate will have an impact as to temperature, right? Colder temperatures, you get less degradation. If you have a lot of rain, you know, you're going to move things through the profile faster. So we have to think about all that. And just like we do, even when we're thinking about where certain pesticides can be applied and when, we got to have that same mindset.
Great, thank you for that answer. Would you recommend that a municipality replace their polymeric chemical
additives?
Sorry.
No, at this point, I don't have a recommendation at that. We are actually now looking at the role that these polymers might play in both increasing potentially the PFAS load in the biosolids, because now that polymer can, you know, potentially take more PFAS out of the water, which is good for effluent discharge. But as I said, whatever we do to reduce effluent discharge usually means we have more in the biosolids. But it also could be that the PFAS is released from this polymer is very slow or low. And so that pore water study that we do to just kind of ferret that out, we haven't done that with any of these. It just turns out that most all the materials we got back in 2014, we didn't have any of these issues that we started to see for some of the newer biosolids in the last 2 years, which led us to revise our methods. So we're actually investigating all that. So at this point, no, I wouldn't recommend that. but we are hoping to have answers to guide the municipalities on how to do this and what might be a concern.
Great, thank you. From Dan, as we phase out, new chemicals will replace. How do you recommend we go about understanding which new chemical should be used or approved so that this isn't the next problem 30 years from now?
Yeah, that's a good comment. Obviously, right now, as PFASs are being phased out, it's just they're being replaced with other PFASs because most people aren't treating them as a whole family or class.
Mm-hmm.
But when's the next chemical? I think, you know, I always say that we don't always know enough about toxicity, but we can know something about foreverness. And any chemical that has a forever nature, we need to think about it. I mean, I will tell you, there is a sugar substitute that has a forever signature. You know, right now we don't associate it with toxicity, but if it has a forever signature, then it's just building up and building up, and we should rethink about that. And this is the problem when you have FDA, you have EPA, we have all these different regulatory agencies trying to do their best, but when they're not at the table talking, then things like this can happen. So I think that's a really good question, and as scientists, regulators, and everybody online playing different roles, we need to have those conversations. It was a really good question.
Too many silos and not enough collaboration.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And is California, are they California limits suitable to follow?
Well, I think that they are, a lot of those low limits are driven by consulting commercial labs saying they can get down to 1 parts per trillion. Okay, but let's look at standard deviations around numbers and things. I think that those are, you know, hard numbers to have confidence in, that 5 and 6 parts per trillion, but it's what California's doing. So would I recommend that for my own state? I probably would not.
Okay. You have a comment that thank you for your presentation. Great work that you're doing. So, another question that came in is, what is the best available technology to treat PFAS at wastewater treatment in order to minimize the discharge to the environment?
Yeah, so if we're talking about like discharge to effluent, it's really, most plants are pretty much strapped to just using some type of absorption technology right now. There are research groups looking at other things, including polymers. So polymers can be used to pull things out of solution. And I know Matt Simsick and his research group there is looking to see now, do PFASs, do they stay sequestered in this material or are they released? And that gets back to my comment about our little pore water assay, same thing. So he's looking at that. I think both he's funded by Minnesota and by Department of Defense. So there's a lot of work being done. And then in terms of whether they're measuring it in their discharge, it depends what the state is requiring, whether it's measured or not. But I will tell you, the Water Research Foundation, you know, even though it's usually only one project, a couple projects a year, they are trying to fund things to ferret all that out and understand what comes into the process, what's happening to it during the process, what's coming out in the effluent. And there's another proposal call right now for another type effort, which I'm working with the team on trying to submit a proposal for that. So there's a lot of research going on. We don't have all the answers yet.
Yes. We're seeing it all over the place. All righty. Angela Taylor also has another question. Because sampling and analytical methods are still being optimized and standardized, how difficult is it to compare results between studies, and how confident are you in the conclusions of your projects? And also, were the concentrations presented indicative of maximum values, mean, or medium?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so there are a lot of changes going on. I think I'll answer the end first. So, you know, we do, you know, when you send things to a commercial lab, it's usually just one sample, and we do everything in usually 3, 4, or 5 replicates. So when we're representing a number for a given product, we have a lot of confidence in that number, and we report our standard deviations and our various QA/QC controls that have to occur, including standard addition, matrix spikes. So we feel pretty confident about the data that we report in terms of, for the method that was used. And as I pointed out, we recently revised our method early this year, and now we have to see, did that change perfluoroalkyl acid data, or is that just going to extract more of other things? We don't know yet. And we're also looking to try to, characterize, precursors that can be present that are hard to look for, because if you don't extract them, you can't see them. But it doesn't mean when they're land applied, they won't generate some of these intermediates and end products that we do measure. So there's a lot of side chain polymers that have very high molecular weights that are not picked up in some of the, even high mass resolution systems if they're focused on small molecules versus these large ones. So there's a lot of things to go on. I know, typical commercial labs, they have a lot of samples, they got to turn them around, and we can start asking them to do more and more. But what do we really need them to be looking at? Because if they do more and more, then the cost goes up per sample, and then that straps everybody for getting their samples analyzed. So, I hope through our screening, our target, we can say, well, what should you be looking for in biosolids versus what should you be looking in a water sample? Could be that a lot of PFASs aren't showing up in the water directly. So we don't need to look for, 60 plus in all the screening. Maybe we can just look for a couple dozen and we're happy. And then biosolids might be a different picture, because that's where all the more strongly sorbed PFAS are going to go, and that's where the precursors are mostly going to be. So
yeah,
it's a big question. That was my short answer.
All righty. We have another question. Has novel or newer materials been considered to help with defluorination, like Acidimicrobium strain A6?
Yeah.
And are we going to be seeing newer or novel materials like the above for treatment and regulation?
So I know you're talking about the work that Peter Jaffe has published on. There's still a lot to understand about that process. And although they did see some defluorination, they used very high concentrations. And what people don't realize is when you buy PFAS and you think it's, PFAS, PFOA, and you're using those high concentrations, all those, even if it's 1 to 3% of impurities, they're usually PFAS impurities, and those could be degrading and not necessarily what you think you're degrading. So, I appreciate the work that Peter's trying to do and trying to figure things out. I know one of my previous graduate students, Jin Liu, is working with him. She's at McGill University trying to help really solidify, does this bacteria do this? We would love for that to be the case. But even if it was, it is so far from any kind of implementation. So we're not ready to even go down that path. But we need to be working on that path, because, remember the days of chlorinated solvents, we didn't think we could degrade them, and all of a sudden somebody found a bacteria that could degrade them, and that we could actually cause conditions to promote the growth of that bacteria and get dechlorination. So we all really want to find a bacteria that can do this.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right. We have another question. You mentioned the use of polymer in the sludge process, and how to determine the amount of PFAS the test needed to be altered. Does this mean the polymer binds the PFAS and doesn't allow the PFAS to enter the water source?
Yeah, so I think we've kind of answered that a little bit. Yeah, the polymer could, it depends. There's some organic polymers, some inorganic. I'm learning, some soluble ones, some not as soluble. So for sure, they have potential to really bind the PFASs, thus helping our water side of things, but not necessarily helping the biosolid part of things. However, they could also hold on to them so well that even when they're land applied, even if they do break down over time, it's going to be a very slow release of the PFASs of concern. So there's just, like I said, we're still doing a lot of work. What we saw from the polymers, and this is, I should probably be careful about stating that it's from the polymers. It's our hypothesis that it is the polymers that are being used. But what we saw is emulsions created during the extraction process. and those emulsions would cause for a third layer. You know, we would get multiple layers in our extraction solution. So now we've adjusted our protocol for that not to happen. And it also, if you did your normal dilution that you do before you inject, most people want to have a water organic solvent mix. You would then start to see things precipitate out. And that's, again, because this is what led to the thoughts that it was the polymers, because they can't handle an organic polymer won't be able to handle this high aqueous matrix when we take an organic solvent and mix it with water. So we're still trying to figure that out. We should have more information and hopefully get a paper out before the end of this year, but you know how that goes. It's always slower than I want.
It takes more time than you think.
Yeah.
Okay. We have another question. Which method of exposure causes the greatest health impacts to humans? Ingestion, inhalation, absorption?
I think we all agree in the scheme of the whole thing, it's drinking water, which is why we try to focus on drinking water, because of how much we're drinking and how it's just easily then transferred into the body. So I think that the drinking water route is definitely our biggest one. Not to say everything else hasn't contributed to things showing up in our blood, but I think we pretty much all agree that it's probably drinking water. Now, as we clean up our drinking water, other sources then might become more dominant.
Sure. Right. Does a soil's cation exchange capacity affect PFAS absorption? Sorry.
So PFASs have a range of characteristics. Some of them are cationic and zwitterionic, which means they have both a positive and negative charge. So the negative sites on soil, which is where we get our cation exchange capacity, could definitely, you know, help to slow the movement of any of the cationic or zwitterionic PFAS. Also, what can be occurring that we don't have good handles on, although we have, you know, anecdotal data of the effect of like calcium in the pore water. Can calcium bridge between an exchange site on soil and a normal, like the bulk of the PFAS that are anionically charged? Can that, you know, can that happen? And it's likely that it does happen. But how high does the calcium have to be to see a significant amount absorbed? You know, that there's still basic research in that area to be done.
Okay. Following up on the future chemicals, how do you feel about the next generation chemicals?
Next generation chemicals with PFAS, I'm not sure if that's the ones you mean. I feel like they're all proving to be forever as well. They still, like the shorter chain and some of the ethers, where that just means you popped an oxygen in the chain. It's kind of, oh, I don't want to step on industry's foot, but it's pretty creative. You know, we have a definition of PFAS, but all of a sudden, and it's about chain length. But now if you pop an oxygen in there, well, what's the chain length? What's the carbon chain length? And if we say it has to have a CF3 group on it, well, what if we put a functional group at both ends of the chain? Well, then it's not a PFAS, right? So the very definition of PFAS is a little bit varies in different countries and is not very defined yet. But basically back to one of the responses to an earlier question, if the chemical is showing forever characteristics, then maybe we should rethink using it on widespread and definitely, you know, minimizing its direct discharge into the environment.
Yes. We have a few more questions and it looks like we're running out of time here. I'm going to consult, well, you pique people's curiosity with the sugar substitute that they're wondering which one it is, and sucralose, and how do all of the substitutes have forever signatures?
So that's the one that the sucralose just doesn't seem to break down. So, you know, it shows up in everything. It's kind of a human signature, right? But, and, you know, we don't, obviously FDA approved it for our consumption. So you need a lot to cause a negative effect to humans. I don't know how it affects aquatics, but it was just an example on the other side of things that, you know, forever chemicals probably shouldn't be in the environment. We shouldn't be using them.
Yeah, interesting question here. Are there any ways that PFAS can be removed from the body? that we know
They have
of?
different, so, I mean, everybody online might have different knowledge base, but they have different half-lives in the body, and a half-life in the body means really dissipation. And so the longer chain things have, many more years. So things like PFOA and PFAS have half-lives, anywhere from, I would say, 5-6 years type thing, where the shorter chains have very much shorter half-lives. And so just by phasing out PFAS and PFOA for most all activities, I didn't show it on the slides, but we have had a huge reduction in what's in the human blood serum. So when we just look at the NHANES database, we can just see in just the last 10 years, huge reductions just from not having these things directly discharged into the environment through the air or into our water supply, and phasing them out of use of our products. So, that's a good sign. And that's all, that's kind of a happy note to end on, but I was told to keep my talk at 30 minutes and I think it went to 37. I had to stop.
Okay. I think we're out of time for this session. We do have 3 other questions, and I think you may have answered a couple of them already. How long?
PFAS and Teflon pans. Yeah. Yes, it's used in the production of Teflon pans. And if you use your Teflon pans at high heat, which it tells you not to, or even, certain oils, you can generate some PFAS, but that's what the fan above your stove's for. So use that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Lee. And we love the Hoosier Bisons behind you.
Oh, yeah, those are our babies.
We're glad you did not change your screens, your behind the screen picture. So
yeah, thank you for reminding me that they are in our state seal.
That's right, they are, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing. Thank you for joining us. It was wonderful. We appreciate it. Attendees, we just ask that and remind you that you will be receiving at the conclusion of today a conference evaluation survey, and we just ask that you complete that and give us your feedback. It's quick and easy, and getting your feedback helps make our future events even that much better. So now we have until 1:30 to grab some lunch, and then you can come back into the exhibit hall. We really encourage you to do that. That worked well yesterday. It's an opportunity for you to network with our exhibitors that have joined us. We are using a platform called Remo, and Remo is a virtual platform where we can gather as colleagues and communicators, and for our purposes, exhibitors and attendees, and just have conversations about pollution prevention and what we can do and what we are doing, and share some information. It's really a great tool. So when you arrive in Remo, you will have a profile, and you can set that up if you haven't already, and you just navigate with a quick click of your mouse to the table and the exhibitor table that you want to be involved at. To get to Remo, just as a reminder, on the Hay Summit platform at the top, there is a Remo exhibit hall tab, and you can just click on that. It'll take you to the Remo platform, and you'll be able to have face-to-face live video interaction. As a reminder, and Ben McKnight did mention this earlier, we do suggest, if you have the ability to use Firefox or Google Chrome is working in most cases, to connect to Remo as your browser, that seems to be working best. So again, we thank you for joining us this morning. We will be back at 1:30 to wrap up our conference, and we've got a great afternoon planned for you. So we'll see you back at 1:30 and see you in the Remo platform over lunch. Have a great lunch.